Hello guys, my name is Anna and I'm a Ukrainian. I have decided I will vlog daily from my country Ukraine since the start of this awful war with Russia, and in my daily videos I try to update you on the important situations inside Ukraine, and I'm always glad to clarify some facts from our history and our culture, so feel free to ask these questions as they inspire my future vlogs. Traditionally, I try to ignore Russian trolls under these videos and in the comments that they leave because I believe it's pretty difficult to fight with a machine, but whenever it's a real person, I'm very grateful for those of you who try to persuade that they make wrong choices or that they are victims of propaganda. And after so many soldiers and the wounded left Azovstal, these trolls actually activated, and they have left lots of comments about that this is an example of defeat, that we surrender, that this is a demonstration of Ukraine's weakness, and I think just the contrary. And that is why I want to dedicate this video to the attitude to the captives and people with disabilities after the war. And this is a very ugly Soviet tradition that will explain you very much about the situation in general. Well, as I have already mentioned, this very loud celebration of victory was not common for Soviet Union for a pretty long period of time, and maybe 10 years or even more after the actual victory in the Second World War, there were no parades, no bright celebration, fireworks, music, and military marching down the Krasnaya Ploshchad. And later on, this myth started to appear and to grow, and at first it was more or less normal, but later it turned into this victory craziness and militarism. But the Second World War was a very tragic event that led not only to the deaths of millions of people, but also to the millions, dozens of millions of people who were injured, who lost their limbs, who got scars, who were unable to continue their work or even normal life because, well, first of all, the level of medicine was much lower at that time. Secondly, Soviet army never really cared about the people, and to a great extent they were among the winners of this war, and we were among the winners of this war because we sacrificed hundreds of thousands of people and did not care about that much. And so there were lots of wounded, there were lots of people with disabilities that they received during the war. And they did not receive proper care from the state. And there are lots of documents in archives, in Russian archives, that were even recently opened, where they describe camps that were created for these people with disabilities, veterans with disabilities, so that they are not visible on the streets of Moscow or other big cities in Soviet Union. There is a story that once Stalin was driving a prospect and looking out of the window of his car, he noticed that there were lots of people, veterans with these disabilities, and they looked bad because, well, like, they were not cared much about. There were not many prosthetics or other things that can simplify the life right now, and they were wearing medals, and all of that looked very depressive for Stalin, and he made an order to hide such people, not to improve their life, not to try to save the situation, but just to hide these people. And many of them were kept in something quite similar to concentration camps, where they received minimal medical help, minimal financial help, and they were simply waiting for them to die. There are lots of books on that. It is not just like my story, and I'm not telling it to depict Russia in a negative way. It was a general Soviet story, and a Soviet person must be very strong, which is very similar to Nazi idea of a person. So, and it was not okay for them to see people with the disabilities on the streets. And I think this is one of the greatest sins that Stalin's regime committed against the people of all Soviet Union, including Russia. One more thing is the attitude to the captives. In many countries of the world, people fight to return captives back home and to support them, and they are also treated as important soldiers. But in Russia and during the Second World War especially, many of them were executed because it was treated as a betrayal. And we all pretty well know that in the majority of cases, these are extremely brave people who got in wrong place, in wrong time, and then after they are released, they can be very useful to their country. They can return back to fighting, or they can provide important experience. Many of them do not tell, the majority of them do not tell any secrets or anything else. And for me, for example, people who were released from Azovstal, they are heroes, and I don't treat it as a Ukrainian defeat. It is a normal, it is the only possible humane attitude to people. And captives, Soviet captives of the Second World War, many of them were imprisoned, many of them were executed. And also lots of people who worked, who were sent from Ukraine and other countries who were sent to work in Germany, and these were obligatory work, something like not the choice of people to go, but a part of this Nazi regime usage of human resources. They were also treated as enemies for a very long period of time in Soviet Union. And I think that they still preserve this attitude when they do not try to understand the problems a person encounters on its way to the victory. Because once again, this is what is different between Ukrainians and Russians. We do not glorify war. We understand that any war is a tragedy, and together with this war, there are lots of other tragedies, personal, local, national, lots of wounded, lots of people with disabilities that they got that war, lots of psychological traumas, lots of other things. And then when the state treats them as enemies, this is not a state. And this is a typical reaction of Russia. And I'm sure that many soldiers that were captured here in Ukraine, and many soldiers that were wounded on the battlefields of my country, Russian soldiers, they will die, they will not return home because their country, big Russia, does not think how to save them. And once again, this demonstrates a very dark background, a very dark soul of modern Russian state. And the stories about groups of military who were present on the battlefields of the Second World War to control the soldiers, and if they wanted to escape or surrender, they were shooting them. Something similar happens right now in Ukraine, and very often maybe you have heard about Chechnya military groups on the territory of the eastern Ukraine and in Bucha and Hostomel, and their function is not to fight, but their function is to control Russian soldiers who don't want to fight. And if something goes wrong, they can shoot, they can kill. Very often they kill the wounded. And it demonstrates a totally inhumane attitude to war and to its own people in Russia, not only to Ukrainians. That's why we cannot expect anything normal from Russia until this regime falls, and a couple of decades I mean the world, work with them to explain them the mistakes, to clean this really Nazi psychology and attitude. So for me, the news that many people, the wounded, the soldiers, were able to leave Azovstal is not the example of our defeat, but the example of the victory of the human rights, respect, and of course, by sacrificing these people, we cannot win. And I'm sure those of you who follow the news on Ukraine, you see that there are lots of new places that were occupied and now we got them back. And in general, the situation is very positive. And the more weapons we receive, the stronger we become. Thank you for watching. Thank you for your support. I'm looking forward for your questions. Slava Ukraini!